Do you feel safe?
Yes, I feel safe.
No, I feel the comfort in my generation.
I still do feel relatively safe.
Yes, I feel safe because I'm surrounded by people who support me.
Welcome to the second episode of FRONTLINE, the informative podcast for youth in the Baltic states about security in the region. I am your host and moderator, Renar Skairis, and today we have gathered young representatives and experts from all three Baltic states to ask the importance of the youth vote in the European Parliament elections and how will the shift to the right impact the future security of the Baltic states region. So today's objective is to look at the European Parliament election results, discuss the importance and what is the role of youth in voting in general, and what are the main insights of the European Parliament elections. So I'm joined with the panelists, Mihails Skočevskis from Latvia, a young leader from Together EU Community of Latvia, Laurynas Vilkas from Lithuania, the president of the League of Young Conservatives, Dr. Stefano Brachrioli from Estonia and associate professor of European Studies at the University of Tartu. And I think we could start traditionally with a short introduction of oneself. So please, Laurynas, you can start.
Yeah. Hello, the viewers behind the screen. I'm Laurynas. I'm the chairman of Young Conservative League of Lithuania, and also I'm a student in Vilnius University, and I'm studying political science.
Great, thank you. Dr. Stefano?
Hi everyone, I'm Stefano. As was just said, my position at the University of Tartu is Associate Professor of European Studies, which means that I teach quite a lot of stuff related to European studies. I also do research on populism, European elections, among others, and political dynamics.
Right, thank you. Mihail?
Hello everyone. My name is Mihails Skočevskis. And I'm just recent graduate from Riga Technical University. And although my main field is the technology field, I feel very interested in politics, in international security, and I feel this is the topic to speak on.
Great. We have a lot of seemingly different opinions, maybe, and then different people here. But I would like to start with a short introduction. Maybe about what are the main insights and of the parliament elections. Therefore, what has changed from the previous parliament? What was the turnout, the youth turnout, and what are some other crucial aspects that need to be taken into account of this new European Parliament? Maybe I could give the word for our expert here. Stefano?
I can start happily. Yes, indeed, this was the 10th European Parliament elections, and it came at a quite good time. Again, celebration in the Baltic states, 20 years are in the EU. And yes, maybe I will focus on three main things. One is the turnout. The other one is, let's say, how the balance has changed. And then again, pretty much how that affects the future governance of the EU. I'll try to be short. First one, turnout. Well, turnout grew of literally 0.1. So we can say that the turnout has grown. But really, again, we are still around the 50%. So pretty much in comparison to 2019, really the change has been a decimal. In terms of differences, what we know is something that by now we know for quite some time. So the youth tend to participate less. Let's say, in the more mature cohorts. And there, of course, we can see a participation degree which that decreases of at least around 20% vis-a-vis, let's say, the average. We also know that the turnout varies quite a lot from country to country, from member states. Now, without saying too much about individual cases, here we really see, let's say, a tangible difference between, let's say, countries of Western Europe and countries of Central and Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. This is something that is there and has been there since the enlargement. So it's something that we might want to discuss a bit further. Now, in terms of balances, what has changed? The past time, in 2019, we were talking about the green wave, right? Probably you remember, right? This time, no green wave. I would say that there has been, in fact, a green reflux. So first point, clearly the Greens were among the losers. So were, in fact, the liberals of reform. In terms of mainstream parties, I would say that the two mainstream parties, the two largest, so the EPP on the center right and the Social Democrats on the center left, hold. The EPP a bit better, the Social Democrats a bit less, but still overall they are there. What have been somehow obviously a quite well predicted change has been the growth of the far right or of the national conservatives. We can call them in different ways. And we can dig deeper into that as we move in the discussion. But I would say that yes, that has been something quite predicted. Now we know that, let's say, the group that has become the Patriots, basically held by Viktor Orban and Fidesz, is now the third largest group in the European Parliament. I would say still one factor to bear in mind is that there is a lot of far-right, populist, national conservative in the EP, but they are divided. That's a factor that clearly matters. And the last point that I want to mention, yes, it's about the future. We have seen already that what used to be the grand coalition behind the previous and future, most likely, Commission of Ursula von der Leyen is still there. Most likely there will be some sort of dealing with a part of the National Conservatives, and that part of the National Conservatives is likely to be the ECR. To what extent this will imply widening the coalition, I'm quite skeptic about that, but there will be, I suppose, some certain degree of convergence as the governance of the EU will take shape, and that will happen somehow in the end of September.
Right. Are there any concerns of maybe some more radical policies, or some concerns that would kind of directly affect the youth, or is this shift to the right just a normal and predicted thing?
Well, I would say that, again, as far as we talk about policies and as far as we talk about policies that deal with the youth, again, provided that, let's say, we will see, and I believe we will see, some sort of convergence between maybe center-right, EPP, the Liberals, and maybe the ECR, so let's say the least extreme of the National Conservatives, then I suppose that, let's say, where we might see changes that are actually of interest to the youth are, let's say, environmental policies and Green Deal. I'm not saying that this will be scrapped, but for sure it might be rethought in certain points. And the other one might have to do with migration. Now we know that one of the main factors that determine the youth voting, also for the far right and the traditional right, has been concerned about immigration, and so therefore we might expect, let's say, something happens in this sense.
Okay, what is the perspective of the youth members, if I may? How do you feel like your voice has been represented in the European Parliament? I mean, I hope I don't have to ask whether you did vote in the elections, but what is your main takeaway from the elections, and then being as a young leader, for example, Laurinus?
For sure, yeah, that shift to the right was predicted, and in Lithuania we saw that. But I don't know, I feel representative for people who I voted, they got elected. So I'm happy that the candidates I chose were elected. But the green policies will for sure take the second stage now. And I think maybe not in Lithuania, but in Western Europe, the migration is a big topic. So that was the youth was motivated by that to vote maybe for those far right parties, and we'll see. But in my experience, I feel representative fine for Lithuanian youth. One of the main topics right now is security, and we elected 3 APP members, so we feel representative in that field.
Okay, so you also mentioned, as also before, Stefano mentioned the shift of maybe the very well-known green policies, and then what von der Leyen has been really known for, the European Green Deal, and kind of the shift towards a more secure Europe, and then less talk about the Green Deal. But a lot of the times that is exactly what the youth is known for, with leaders like Greta Thunberg, to say the least, and a lot of policies that oftentimes resonate more with the members of youth, especially the environment. And how do you feel, Mikhail, about the turnout, about the elections themselves, and about the results?
I of course I voted, and I feel very and skeptic and positive at the same time. I have some kind of a mixture of these two parts, but the good thing in Latvia that the rate of the people who voted is grown. But of course there's a little number of the increase, but at least it shows that the people is more interested, is more motivated. So it might be a sign that they feel that their vote is counted, and they are heard, at least. And I guess this is why it happened, and why it maybe didn't work out for any certain groups of people. It is a field of future research. I mean, for the politics students, for other scientists, and it should be, debated and studied in future years. But in Latvia, we had a lot of events and special activities that were dedicated special to youngsters, so they would understand that their vote counts, and the democracy in Europe, and in turn in Latvia, it needs to be somehow defended.
Yeah, I also wanted to stay on the topic of the security. I also mentioned again. So what is the link? Shortly, we vote in the European Parliament elections. We see a slight shift to the right. We see it grow in populism and radical right movements. And how does one even address the fact that that can change the security in the region? And how does that directly involve the Baltic states as well? And where does the youth appear in this whole sense of security and in the European Parliament elections? Maybe Stefano, you can comment on that.
Yes, maybe I start with the youth and then I move to the security. Yes. I would just really put 2 points. The first one is that I think it's always a bit tricky to talk about the youth. Simply because, in a sense, we are not talking about the youth as an interest group as much as, say, the farmers, right? So you might have youth that tend to be on the conservative side, politically speaking, and youth on the leftist side, politically speaking, and they might share much more, let's say, with their senior fellows, let's say, from the same party. But of course, it's also true that they also have common concern. And I think the main common concern is to be heard, regardless of what is their political ideology. And I think that simply the best way to be heard is to vote. And this might sound cliche, but I think, for example, the Brexit referendum gives us a very good idea. Less than 60% of the young people voted, and massively they voted to stay. 90% of the elderly people voted and massively voted to leave. In the end, they left. So now, when it comes to security, I think that, as you just mentioned, security, especially in this region, I think is a shared concern of both, let's say, more senior cohorts and younger cohorts, also because, again, it's something that is felt quite directly. Now, the point is that how the elections affect security? I would say not too much. Maybe sounds a bit euphemistic, but that's pretty much the case. For 2 reasons. The first one is that as such, the European Parliament does not shape too much the EU foreign policy. We can maybe discuss that a bit further, but I say the European Parliament primarily expresses its voice, but that voice needs then to be heard by the Council or by the Member States. And that's not always the case. The other one is that if we talk about which forces are likely to shape the future of debate on foreign policy in the European Parliament, these are pretty much forces that tend to share, let's say, the same view on issues that are of key concern in the region. Russia, let's say, invasion of Ukraine and supporting Ukraine. Well, let's say the 3 mainstream parties that were part of this first Ursula coalition Well, EPP, Social Democrats, and Renew very much share that, it's the case to support Ukraine, it's the case to counter Russia. When it comes to the Greens, pretty much the same case. And when it comes again to the part of the National Conservatives that is more likely to be on board, so the ECR, they also share that perspectives. So I would say that the voice of the European Parliament in terms of impact will not change. And yes, we will maybe hear a bit more of pro-Russia narratives, but they are fairly unlikely to change the overall trajectory.
Mm-hmm. How does that sound for the tricky definition of a member of youth? And do you feel like the security issues is the main priority here? Do you feel safe in the region? And do you feel like a sort of concern of how the security situation could change? And maybe then we can also kind of reflect on the phenomenon of kind of how young people can become more radicalized in their voting preferences, and why also that happens. And then we also see how the youth participation levels are concerning as well. So what is your insight on that? And would you say that it's a phenomenon of that the young people are becoming more radical? Can you kind of assess and reflect on maybe why and how the security concerns and the turnout and then the results kind of reflect what the youth feels?
Well, does the youth is radical? In some cases, I think yes. In Lithuania, not. I think the youth is center-right, center-left. I think far-right really does a good job in social media, and that's how they can collect a lot of youth votes, and how to get to that youth and speak their message and get to the receiver. So they used a lot of social media, and I think the center and the left will be the wake-up call that to get that portion of the votes. And the security, well, I don't know. I feel safe. Sometimes not. When the Russia invaded Ukraine, I didn't. I was shocked. But now, when you see all the support that Ukraine has, and of course the NATO and in some parts EU gives you that feeling of safety, and and also the German brigade coming into Lithuania also will make Russia think twice before invading Lithuania or any Baltic states. But I think Ukraine will win this war, and will have a different Europe after that.
Okay, a very positive stance. I think that's always better than really passive, negative on things. But what do you think about the radicalization, or would you say that it's that sort of a phenomenon, or is it an attention grab and young people are against the system or against the ruling coalition? And what is your perspective?
Yeah, first of all, as a follow-up to what Stefanos said, I wanted to say that from 9 elected members of the European Parliament from Latvia, if I'm not mistaken, the 5 of them are still the same people from the previous. Yeah, so it's more than half. And if we say that the times are changed, the new people came. So I'm very open-minded about new people coming to politics, especially on a large scale politics, because it's in the whole Europe. Yeah, it's not the national politics. So I'm very open-minded, but at the same time we need to bear in mind all these aspects, that are happening in the Europe and in the whole world. So I would say that the change, maybe someone would have said that it is predictable, but I wouldn't think that the only youngsters are those who elected these right-wingers. I mean, there are elder people who also are the most vulnerable to all this propaganda and all these fake news that are spreading all these authoritarian states.
Yeah, I would also like for you to reflect on the question raised itself. Do you even agree with me saying that the youth is becoming more radical in its preferences, and how has that shift changed the narrative, and how does it look for the future? There's a lot of talk about how the education systems are at fault. We don't give a proper background on the role of democracy, and there are certain narratives that are always being played out. Is it social media, or is it education, or is it the us against the system? So what is the actual situation like?
Well, I mean, of course, I can give you the silver bullet of what it is, because it's really like, a set of different factors that interact. I would really start by saying that, yes, I completely agree. It's not that now the youth is the main responsible for, let's say, the shift to the right or so on. And again, the youth is plural. There was this say in the 80s. I know it because I heard, not because I was young at the time. But basically, when you're young, you are revolutionary. When you grow up, you become social democrat, then you become conservative, then you die reactionary. And that has never been the case, and even less is the case now. Yeah. So youth is diverse. Now, what somehow it's interesting, I would say, is that on the one hand, in terms of what factors play a role, yes, I think definitely. For example, the fact that the far-right, national conservative, not only them, that you can also see, for example, on the other side of the story, on the radical left, are much better as using the social medias in terms, let's say, of capturing and maybe spreading simple message, which are, let's say, kept simple on purpose. It's something that attracts more, let's say, certain audiences. Of course, the youth is one of them. This also relates to the fact that, let's say, unlike the older generations, the youth has been less exposed, for example, to, let's say, consolidated traditional medias that are kind of, not challenging their kind of, in what they share. So let's say, while my father grew up reading his favorite newspaper, and that was the reliable one. And of course, also read the social medias, but let's say the two things coexist. Yeah, younger people are more used to simply read and consume social medias, and less maybe the established outlets. That's one thing. And the other one is also, I know this might sound a bit, let's say, cliche, but I also think it's quite important to bear in mind, and this I speak also for my generation, I still consider myself to say not too senior, that, let's say, I think that many of us take democracy for granted. So the point is that, and even here in the Baltic states, all of us have grown up in a country which was democratic. So somehow we tend to take democracy for granted. And by the way, this is another part of the story. Nowadays, the parties or the forces that tend to be more authoritarian and more, let's say, on the autocratic side will not tell to you, hey, look, we want to abolish democracy. None of them will tell you. None of them will tell you, we want to disempower you as a voter. It's not time of coups, let's say, in kind of advanced democratic societies. Generally, what happens is simply that they kind of, parasitize the state and basically turn functioning democracy into non-functioning democracy. But none of them will tell you, hey, look, I'm an autocrat. So that's basically, I think, a part of the story. Maybe the last point on this. The last point is that I think that more and more, when it comes again to what is the issue of debate, we witness, apart from actually issue of contestation such as economy or, let's say, defense, health system and so on, we see more and more of culture wars, which are less on the substance and more on principles. Sometimes might be, let's say, a good thing, sometimes might not be a good thing. And the other thing, I would say, specifically in the context of the Baltic states, over the last 15 years, we have seen, let's say, a very de-ideologized politics. I mean, parties and ideology didn't matter so much. This both in terms of voters and politicians moving from one to another party. Now I would say that we are seeing a re-ideologization of politics. So to some extent rediscovering what, say, conservative means and, let's say, leftist means. I think I'll stop here.
That's right.
Yeah, because I was also it's clear that there isn't like a factor that we can speak up and upon what shapes, the ideology of I think what they are called here in Latvia, or at least what I've heard, is sometimes we are our generation is regarded as the children of Europe, and so how different is that to be there in a comparatively young democracy who was, and I think we speak for all three of us at least, that we have grown up in the European Union. We've known our states as members of NATO, and how does that shape our perception, and how does that change our participation as well? But then we see the tendency of young people also not being that active and not participating in other countries as well. So that is an issue that the radical parties and populists and far rights are actively using in social media, etc., to kind of catch at least those members of youth that seem to be more involved and ready to vote. So what would be the way, and what is there to say to other members of youth, maybe to ask the question to ourselves, okay, so why is it important that they vote, and what should we do then to get those people to vote? And especially, I think, in the context of youth, right? So do you maybe, I expect clear vision, a clear recommendation that we can implement now.
It's a very open question, and it's debatable. Yeah, but maybe the answer to this question will be very personal to everyone, because everyone has its own interests, and so they just need to think about his own interest and put them in the first place. Like, what is important for the person? It might be environment, or security, or education. He need to think about that. This one question he want to solve, Europe to solve, and then we need to understand that he is a part of Europe. So if the Europe can, it means that he also would can. Yeah, let's put it like that.
Okay. Do you maybe have a different perspective on the issue itself?
I think the solution is education. I think, we don't give enough attention for it, and we leave that youth to be exposed to the politics like by life, and we have to introduce the politics right in school. Because every citizen is part of politics, and that I think the voting percentage of youth is that low because they don't have an interest, because they don't pay the taxes, they don't have a family, they don't have a car, they don't have a house or something. So maybe those problems, those issues of political debate are not that important for them in that part of their life. Furthermore, it becomes important and they get involved into politics. But we have to expose them, we have to educate them that it's important and that every vote counts, and to protect democracy, to protect our freedom. Because I don't know, for myself, I always feel in debt for my parents and for my grandparents that fought for that freedom. And my job is to secure it and keep it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of youth maybe forget that. So in schools, we have to remind them a lot that it's our job.
I understand, but isn't that the easy way out on this question? Education, communication. I think those are the main two words that I'm I'm hearing. But
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more point that I talked about the awareness of being part of Europe. Then another case is the education, and maybe the third point I would add is the communication, as you said, about the results. So if you vote, then you need to see the, I don't know, either tangible or just known results. So what do these people done in their 5 years or even more? Yeah. So like the youngsters are also want to see the results and to see somehow.
Yeah, I mean, but how important are the results for a person who is doing well, right? for a youth.
Well, that person might do worse after the election. I mean, maybe here just one thought that I have. The first one is that I really think that, in a way or another, yes, I think communication is one way of doing it, but really I think the message should simply be, let's say, if you don't use your vote, someone else will vote on your behalf. And in a way, really, that's the point. And the other thing is that if you don't like how things are going, or if you don't care of how things are going, one day you might care, and simply, again, your voice might not be heard. And maybe here we have the last point, and the last point is that I think that here we have a double problem. The first problem is that in general, at any level, local level, national level, and European level, youth is less, let's say, participating than, let's say, more senior cohorts. That's one factor. The other one is Europe. Overall, European elections have a lower turnout than national ones. That's something that, say, happens all intergenerationally. And maybe here, one other point to make extremely clear, you can even tattoo on your arm or write as graffiti, is that, and this speaks to every generation, nowadays, almost 90% of laws, regulation, whatever affects our life, doesn't come from Riga, Tallinn, Vilnius, or Rome, or Paris, comes from Brussels. So the point is that you might not like, you might not care, and so on, but in the end, that will affect your life very, 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 very directly. So that's definitely something that should really kind of, be clear.
Yeah, and I can definitely totally agree with that. And that also raises the question of moving back to the security, and especially the Baltic states. Can the European Parliament practically impact security is kind of what we touched upon also, and it's more or less no question, the answer no. But should the European Parliament be actively more advocating and more impactful in terms of security? And would that for the younger generation also feel as a solution or a problem? Maybe what's your perspective on that? Given more authority.
Can you repeat the question?
So would giving more authority to European Parliament or the European authorities over the security issues be also a solution and a preventative action for the security for the Baltic states?
Well, I think, we have NATO, and most of the European Union members are also NATO members. So, but I don't think it as a bad thing that EU will have security councils and stuff like that. I think that there will be double the focus on security, so the EU also could pass some issues that are in the regions, and also the European Parliament rhetoric will affect the NATO's policies in some ways, I think, and also the member state policies. And for the youth, I think it's good news. Of course, always the young people tend to giving the point to the young people why they don't go vote. I think it's the issue that has to be solved step by step. And it's normal that maybe not a lot of youth issues and young people problems came to political discussions because they don't go vote. So the politicians count that it's more practical to focus on those maybe senior age groups that will come and vote. So that's the biggest concern, because maybe the youth vision or on the security could not be heard, and also the cybersecurity, I think it's a big thing, and Europe and the European Union should really take it as a big consideration, same as an army and forces like air forces and naval forces. Is the same factor because you can see the Russian bot farms in everyday your life, every day, like on the social media. You can find some news, and in the comments you can see 10 bots that are on all the posters and spilling shit on the government and trying to divide us and so on.
Yeah, that is also an issue. But I kind of catch that you also mentioned the differences and of course we are talking about the perspective of youth and what policies really are there for that group of people. But from your perspective, since you outlined the differences from young voters and older voters, what is then the big difference that you feel like the youth should be more concerned about, and what is that kind of issue that, at least from your perspective, would be the most crucial one that you feel like maybe the older generations are not addressing appropriately? I think cybersecurity is the main. Of course, you can find in every age group that it's important for them, but I think the cybersecurity affects most of the young people and the youth, and the older age groups, maybe not that much. The seniors, the most, I think, don't use like social media or their phones, and they stay on television. Okay, there might be some slight, of course there are slight changes on the use of technology. And do you feel like there's a different perspective on the specific policies maybe that you as a youth member feel responsible for?
As a youth member, I wanted to say one reminder for all those people who still in 2024 think that the security is not important. Mm-hmm. I would say security is investing in security is investing in future. So if we invest in our precautionary measures to be protected and to be on time, we need to invest in security, whatever it is. I mean, in cybersecurity and physical security and all of the other aspects, they're equally important, because if we don't have one type of security, most probably we don't have another one. After the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, the importance has grown tremendously, and we the same as with the democracy, we shouldn't take security for granted. Mm-hmm.
So I think more in detail maybe about the security issues in the Baltic states and the situation now. Does the election kind of outline a tendency also towards some sort of narrative based on the security and geopolitical situation right now in the Baltic states, directly also from the voters in the Baltic states? Has there been any radical differences, changes, or maybe a sense of motivation to vote or who to vote for?
Yeah, maybe I'll touch upon this. Maybe I just mentioned a couple of things about the European Parliament that you asked before. But yes, I think that especially here in the context of the Baltic states, I mean, both young voters, and that's to some extent something new, and again, more senior voters, I would say, add security as, let's say, if not the key, I would say one of the key, but I would still say the key focus of concern. Now, what was interesting on the other from the other side of the coin, what was interesting is that, let's say, if I look at the three Baltic states, pretty much all the mainstream parties, all of them, from the center left to the center right, had pretty much the same position on security. So let's say, I would say the tricky part of the story is that while security was the key concern of almost every voter, all the parties shared pretty much the same concern on security. And so basically security didn't become a key factor to choose the party you vote for. Then, of course, you look at what's next. Then it might be economy, might be concerns about migration, might be, I don't know, what type of society do I want, multicultural, stuff like that. But in that sense, security was a top concern, but didn't help to choose the party. Yes, of course, we know that in all the three Baltic states, if you really look with the lens, you can find parties that either had a slightly different position or a very different position. But these, in all the three countries, were considered very much, let's say, niche parties, and parties, let's say, would not be coalitionable, parties that somehow are seen almost as anti-system. So in that sense, that I would say has been something quite specific. But I will also say it's fairly specific of the region. Mm-hmm. Because on the other hand, if you zoom out and then you look at the broader European pictures, then you see that somehow, let's say, security concerns are clearly not shared by everyone. Mm-hmm. And also, they're not shared in the same way. So what I'm saying here is that, and this goes back to the much bigger picture, but let's say what we see here in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, is that, let's say, security is seen as a concern. Why? Because basically Russia is invading a sovereign country, and the understanding is that if Russia is not stopped there, the thing might spill over. Mm-hmm. Let's say, the more we move to Western Europe, to countries such as France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and so on, the more this position is more nuanced. And you find a lot of voices that also share security concern, but they decline in absolutely the opposite way. So if we don't find a way to establish a common ground with Russia, then basically we push Russia to the corner, and that will be the security concern. That will be basically what trigger, let's say, Russia to become a threat. So here we are basically saying that on one side, Russia is a threat because, let's say, it should be basically taught a lesson, and on the other hand, in Western Europe, according to many political observers, the story is like, well, but let's say if we push Russia too far, that what will make it, let's say, unpredictable. And this, I really think, it's the problem also of the broader picture. If I may add just one point about what you asked before, the European Parliament and the role of the EU. I think, yes, the European Parliament already has a voice. I mean, again, the European Parliament does not shape policies, but what the European Parliament says, broadly speaking, on foreign policy, is not completely disregarded. It plays a role, but does not shape policies. In order for the European Parliament to have more voice, you would have to change the treaties. Mm-hmm. And here I put, let's say, what probably will be an issue of contestation, and is an issue of contestation, that if you touch the treaties, I would say that the biggest point to touch in foreign policy is not the voice of the European Parliament, but the qualified majority versus unanimity. That is basically what makes really the EU foreign policy more tricky to be dealt with, as we saw, for example, with Hungary and so on and so forth.
But I also wanted to kind of clarify this trend of we touched upon it also previously, but just to kind of make it clear. So is there a sense of worry that with the security issues directly in the Baltic states, and in the bigger picture, the rise of the far right? As you mentioned previously, there are also differences in those far right parties, but generally speaking, what precedent does that set? Is it a worrying tendency, especially for our security here, or are we talking about far right and in more different stances like immigration and multicultural Europe and etc.? So regarding security specifically, is it a concern also?
Yes, but I wouldn't say it's a concern when it comes to the European Parliament. I mean, for the reason I said before, the majority will stay there. What is of concern is if that, let's say, type of far right will get to government in their own countries. So again, if one day Marine Le Pen will become president of France, if one day, let's say, Alternative für Deutschland, in a way which by now seems inconceivable, but manages to form a coalition and somehow to get to power in Germany and so on and so forth, that might be a challenge. Why? Because basically the member states play a key role in shaping security. The Baltic states are not superpowers, so of course they depend on their security also in terms of allies, and if allies become less reliable, less committed, that is a problem. And of course, now we're talking about Europe, but there is a huge elephant in the room, which is the US. And if we open that, we can stay here until tomorrow. But of course, again, this is definitely, let's say, something that A, is of concern, and B, also would put more attention on European security. And maybe NATO then becomes, let's say, hopefully doesn't get a question mark, but of course, let's say a NATO with the disengaged US would be half NATO, basically.
True. I also wanted to continue on this on the same question with Laurinus. Maybe you can also comment on the perspective of also the League of Young Conservatives. Like what does that security threat entail? And I also wanted to mention how serious the influence of the national governments are, because those are the ones that are shaping the EU policy itself. And of course, then there is the question of also the tendencies in the Baltic states of the far right as well, becoming more and more popular, and also amongst younger people. So, conservative youth and young leaders. What is the view there, and what is the long-term vision of maybe that tendency?
Yeah, well, talking about security, I think the first thing is not Baltic region security. I think it should be whole Europe security, because we all know good that if Ukraine fell, the Finland, the Baltic states, and the Poland would be next eventually. So yeah, and I think we shouldn't. Well, I don't like that European Parliament thinks of the Baltic security issues and something like that. No, it's whole Europe, because it's our European Union values those matters, and also that it's not just like gaining some territory. It's the fight between democracy and autocracy and totalitarianism and dictatorship. And I think that's the European values are for democracy and to fight off those dictatorship things. So, security is 50% issue. Like our security is like 50% how we'll prepare in our countries, and 50% how can we support Ukraine, because right now they are fighting for our security and for our freedom. But can you repeat the question? I forgot about it.
No, I think you were very much on point with the answer, but it was more of your reflection as well, specifically the League of Young Conservatives. Like, what is the specific view also on the far right growing, and the security effects and the long-term vision of that tendency?
Well, in Lithuania, it's not an issue, because the far right is like not a thing most of the times. As I said before, the youth votes are in center right and center left. In Europe, it's a concern that the member states will turn the backs on the European border, the east flank that will be holding Russia. But I don't know. I can only give kudos to our government, which take this matter really serious. I think yesterday there's a new program that teach citizens how to fly with drones, and there's a lot of projects considering the security of the region.
Okay. Michal, maybe also your reflection on this, and maybe when we've kind of talked over how the far right is a serious issue for national governments, and about the role of European Union. Do you feel like the center parties are kind of lacking in the sense that they should adapt more of those far-right narratives to kind of keep a stable support in terms of security and in terms of what is also really impactful for the youth?
Yeah, I can comment on the national situation. It's not as very expressed in our case, but I would say the following thing, that the smallest part is mostly like almost always is the better seen or so they might seem very loud in their opinions, in publishing their opinions, so not talking on the media and then providing their own speeches and talks on topics that they are interested in. But so that's the case when we need to teach the people how to understand these messages, their messages, and transcribe and really assess what do their messages mean, and whether is it a threat to a national or European democracy and security, or whether this is just maybe I'm not saying that fake, but more fake than a real, threat or information. So, and that's a task for media literacy, and as Lorena said, that the education is one of the core components, and I couldn't agree more on that. And maybe this is the point the EU could help the security in Europe to build on. So maybe any grants for research and development programs, and not to mention all these programs to building any software and hardware for the Ukraine, and as far as I know, in Latvia we also the Minister of Defense has their own programs on providing these drones and other techniques and sending it as a help. So I guess this is the path to go. But yeah, in terms of NATO, I guess the responsibilities should be somehow clearly defined. Mm-hmm. Who is in respect of what? Okay, yeah, and I think the overall issue also covers why and how youth also can be involved into the policy shaping, into the activism and everything also in practical senses also that you mentioned, or the programs also that you mentioned. And study. Yeah, that is a great advice as well. So also the question about the leading parties and the shift to the right and the adaptation of policies. We saw how easy it was to kind of transfer the main focus from the Green Deal to security issues. So what would be the next big step, the big transfer or shift maybe towards combating populism and then extremists on both the left and right sides?
Well, maybe two thoughts here. The first one is about the region. I think that, again, if we want people to care, young and less young, in the Baltic context, for example, again, I very much agree that when we talk about Baltic security, we talk about European security, because, again, we are one political unity, both in EU and NATO. So that definitely makes a point. But in order for, let's say, Baltic voters to be somehow heard, motivated, galvanized, I think you might want to have Baltic voices represented. And I think that, again, this is something that, for example, is there now. I think that so far it didn't pop up, but I think maybe we might want. Again, we will have the first high representative from the Baltic states, Kaja Kallas, that I think it's something that would have never happened in the context, not in the context of the ongoing full-scale invasion. So that definitely shows us that there has been a very big shift in the European context, both bringing the region more central, but also somehow giving security a top position. Again, Kaja Kallas is a security-focused High Representative. That's obvious. And this is a voice of the region that speaks for the region and very much understands also who we are countering. That's the first part. The second part about how do we deal, let's say, how do the mainstream forces deal with, let's say, the rise of the far right, populism, Euroscepticism, let's say, we can, of course, differentiate, but pretty much that's the box we are dealing with. My point would be like that, on the one, I would try to kind of use a double strategy of carrot and stick. And here I will now explain myself. I mean, the far right is growing, we know that. It's likely also to grow more in the future, but the far right is divided. And that we know. The far right is very good at mobilizing voters. At European level, is not really good at sticking together. Because, of course, again, hardcore nationalists don't like each other. I'm always better than you, right? So the point is that one thing that mainstream parties should try to do is to keep that front broken. And so, for example, if there are parts of the national conservatives we might not like too much, but at the same time we share a few points with, instead of marginalizing them and push them more to the right, there could be points in which we can find some sort of strategic convergence. Here, of course, specifically in the context of the European Parliament, I'm talking about the ECR. I think that it would be a big mistake for Social Democrats, EPP, and Liberals to completely marginalize the ECR. I think that on some issues it's important to find convergence. Because in this way, again, the ECR would have no temptations to basically look at, again, Orban, AfD, and so on and so forth. The other point is what to do at government's level. And I think here, let's say, for too long time, and here I would say something that we have seen more in the context of Central and Eastern Europe and the Baltic states than in Western Europe, there have been some sort of tolerance of certain behaviors that shouldn't have been tolerated. And here I'm talking about Hungary. I mean, again, for a very long time I've heard, yes, Hungary is a problem, but at the same time we shouldn't, let's say, use Article 7. We shouldn't, for example, push Hungary, let's say, further and so on. I think that it's the moment in which, let's say, we should either use the existing tools, Article 7, for example, or if we find that the times have matured to go in the direction of qualified majority in foreign policy, but I know that this is something that, of course, would open a Pandora box. But at least, let's say, governments should take courageous steps, because otherwise we talk a lot about EU foreign policy, but then it takes one member state, which obviously is not doing the European interest, and I would argue not even its own interest, to undermine basically all the efforts. And this is something that is an elephant in the room and should be addressed.
Absolutely, and also Hungary, Poland, and when thinking for addressing this, and when I immediately hear the issue of also how national governments impact the policies on EU level, etc., I immediately thought, since our podcast is more or less about the youth, we saw a change in Poland, and I'm not sure if you're the right person also to kind of ask this question, but what was the role of youth actually making a change, and what is the also the impact of youth into making change in the future, also talking about Hungary, because of course these are very specific and very I would say crucial things that need to be addressed quickly. So what would you say is or has been the role of youth?
Well, youth mobilization has been key, in fact, to the changing government in Poland. I mean, I would say that, of course, as we were discussing before, the youth is not the silver bullet. But we know that overall, let's say, young, well-educated voters tended to support, let's say, the more liberal opposition, so Tusk. This does not imply that all the youth voted for them. And here, of course, I would say that other factors played a role. For example, again, we know that in Poland, as much as in Hungary, there is a huge difference between, let's say, the capitals, the big cities, and the countryside. And this, of course, affects also the youth. But then, of course, again, if we look at education, and of course we want youth to be educated and engaged, of course that can also fill this gap. So that played quite a big role. But I would say that more than, let's say, the young vote, what made a big role is the mobilization of the youth. So the people went to vote, not just being concerned. And I would say that, of course, I say Poland and Hungary are still fairly different cases, because in Poland, I would say that, yes, the previous government had some, let's say, had extended the control of the executive to non-executive agencies. So to some extent, there was, let's say, a takeover of part of the assets of the institutions of the state by peace, but not in the case as we see in Hungary. In Hungary, I think that the situation has gone by now very far. I hope not too far, but close to too far for sure.
Of course. And maybe before we move on to some hot questions, if you will, as members of youth, I think I started that question the same way when I'm addressing the members of youth here. But given some real life examples on how the mobilization of youth and the actual matter of the vote, what would you say as a member for other members of youth would be something that needs to be heard and that's kind of revelates how important the vote is, also in terms of security, also in terms of what is so-called the secondary elections or the European Parliament elections. So what would you say to the young voters for them to go out vote, and what would be like your message to other to other members of the youth?
I think it's fairly simple. When you go vote, you decide what type of the government you want, if it's national elections. And do you want a progressive government, or you want to stay in the same line as you were in the context of the country? When you go to the European Parliament, it's fairly the same thing. Do you want to have a progressive government, or this modern government, or the same, more or less? And also, I think the key factor is if you don't go vote, somebody will, and they will decide it for you. And then you can write negative comments on the internet how much you like, and be angry at the policies that they're making. But you didn't go to vote, so it's on you that this government is elected.
Okay. Michal, what is your kind of message? Why should the young voters care about security? Why should they care about voting?
Yeah, in that case, I would remind my previous phrase about the security is our future, and so we should care and think about both of them. But one more thing that I wanted to stress on is that although elections in European Parliament are taking place once in 5 years, we please don't think about it only 2 weeks before the elections actually happening. This is the real and hard work throughout all these 5 years. So if you don't know, and you know that you will be participating in elections, you will be voting in 5 years, then you can make observations now about the parties, about the politicians. You can see what do their opinions are, and what do they do, what are their interests, their positions on the actual questions, and so make observations, think critically, and so then you will be prepared in 5 years. I guess 5 years is the very optimal and normal, time span to decide on what the future and security will be.
Continuing on this, what are some practical things where people can actually search and look for information like this? Because a lot of the time, let's say the party's program might not always be the most reliable source of what the party actually stands for. So maybe like a practical practical steps on how can a person even come to a conclusion to what to vote for, even if they are ready to do so. Sometimes that can also be a setback.
Maybe a couple of points on this. Yes, very often parties are less than 100% honest. So in a sense, of course, it's good to read the programs of the parties. I think it's at least can give you a quite clear idea on what are the key key interests and the key priorities for them. I would also mention one thing that there are the parties of the programs of the national parties, and then there are the programs of the European parties. And as a political scientist, you always joke like, no one reads them. But and in a sense, let's say that's quite interesting because in a way these are the overall positions, some sort of minimum common denominator of all the national parties that compose this European party. So at least something quite interesting to read. Now, in terms of how to kind of, prepare for elections, how to kind of, get to know where you stand and where you fit, basically. I would say, okay, apart from, of course, let's say always like, to be informed, reliable medias, let's say, of course, social medias can be useful, but know who you're following. That, of course, is the thing. And I would also say maybe the big challenge with the social medias is that they are designed to create bubbles. So in a sense, I might be a progressive person, I might be a conservative person, and somehow I might even follow reliable, let's say, contacts, people, or let's say channels on social medias, but that somehow keeps me in my own bubble, and I will be less and less exposed to the narratives of the others, which are not necessarily, let's say, enemies or some sort of scaremonger, but just you might want to know what other things. That's it. But for voters, I would say that there are maybe two things that are quite useful. Now it's actually quite common, especially on the eve of the European Parliament elections or where national elections come, to have voting compass. That's actually quite useful. You find, you identify the voting compass, you answer, let's say, 20, 25 questions, and basically the compass helps you to see what is the party or what is the politician you are closer to. Other option, other thing you might want to do, especially because I very much agree, it's not just the moment of the elections, but it's 5 years. There are a number of websites. One, for example, is called How They Vote, in which you can see how your parliamentarians vote in the European Parliament, what policies they stand for, and again, on which issues they take a stance and on which they don't. So this could be quite useful tools, I would say.
Okay, I think we've went over a lot in terms of what has the youth been voting for, whether the youth has been voting, the main conclusions and then takeaways also from what we see after the European Parliament elections, also in a sense of the Baltic security. Are there final regards, maybe before we move on to some short questions with yes or no questions, also on reflecting about how it is to be a young person living in the Baltic states after the European Parliament elections?
I don't know, the polls shows that Lithuanian youth aren't the happiest, so I think it's pretty good.
That's good to hear. But okay. As a tradition, we are doing, I wouldn't say that these are really hot questions, but at least you won't have to answer very long to them because these are yes or no questions, or maybe if you want to reflect, I would ask for you to do it shortly. And I think a really great topic to do these hot questions on, because when we watched the debates on the European Parliament elections, they were also asked the yes or no questions, and they were never answers that ended with yes or no, because it was always a long monologue. So let's see whether this maybe is the topic that makes the people go over the time. But do you think voting from 16 years old should be the norm in all EU countries, since that has been also the norm in a lot of the European Union countries? So maybe let's go, starting from you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very nice. And thank you. I'm the only one talking that long. Should there be a European army? We can start from you.
Yes.
Yes, but it's not a silver bullet. First qualified majority, then European army.
Lourdes?
Tough question. Yes. I think yes. Just a yes.
Okay, and we also kind of touched upon the European Parliament competences regarding security. So should there be a change in that sense? Yes or no? Stefano?
Yes, but nobody wants to open the Pandora box of the treaties. So that's a personal opinion.
Okay, Lourdes?
Yes.
Hey, Mikhail?
Yes, because if there will be an army, there will be these changes, obviously.
Okay, so you're very much on the same level then, I guess. So, from your perspective, is the youth becoming more and more radical?
No.
Stefano?
I also tend to be quite skeptic, so I would go for a cautious no.
Okay.
Yeah, in my opinion, no.
Okay. Should social media, as we mentioned earlier, is used as a really effective way on getting the votes and the support for parties? Should social media be more strictly regulated to ban populist and extremist narratives? Stefano?
Yes, they should have better moderation.
Laurines?
I think no, because it would take freer speech from it. So I think it's up to the person to have critical thinking and to know what's true and what's false.
Yeah, on that question, I would agree with Laurines, the same opinion.
Okay, and then
We don't all agree.
but yeah, essentially, I think it's interesting to hear how we are talking about the perspectives of youth, how we are talking about also the European Parliament elections, and how sort of on the same level we are. So that is always interesting, and I hope that you also take some new perspectives home with you. And yeah, thank you for participating in this episode. It's been an honor.
If you want to hear more on this topic, we have a special message from Editor-in-Chief Wojciech Przybylski of Visegrad Insight about a strategic foresight research that Visegrad Insight did in cooperation with our partners at Leto about European Parliament elections in 2024, how democracy can win and Europe lose.
Hi, my name is Wojciech Przybylski. I am Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight and President of Respublika Foundation. Visegrad Insight is part of Respublika Foundation effort to build an informed debate, a public debate in Central Europe on democratic security. We're doing it as a media platform, uniting the main press titles across the region and promoting fellows who are focusing on democratic security from the countries of Central Europe, not just Visegrad, but also Baltics, Romania, Bulgaria, and Western Balkans and Ukraine, to bring forward their analysis and their perspective and their thought leadership on democratic security to a wider audience, international audience in the English language space, but also through translations, infusing the public debate in national spaces, in national media. At the same time, we have been engaged for a number of years in what is called the strategic foresight, focused on European affairs, informing the public in Europe and informing the public, especially in Central Eastern Europe, about policy options and future directions based on scenarios in times of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen, but we should be nevertheless prepared. And in order to be prepared, you need to build policy options, different scenarios of the political action that is ahead of us. The move, the direction that we pursue has been dictated by increasing uncertainty in global affairs, We have seen that in a number of instances, and also by the need to have an informed public opinion. Right after Brexit, we have seen that the public in Great Britain has been Googling essentially two things. What is Brexit and what is the European Union? And in that illustration, we can see that the public, more often than not, when making policy choices through elections, referenda, but also when decision makers are bound to take an important step, they're not often enough getting their intel and policy options explained, thought through, discussed, and therefore are prone to taking missteps, decisions that they later regret. And the other reason for having strategic foresight by Visegrad Insight, strategic foresight from Central Europe on European affairs, is that it has been voiced for a number of years already, primarily by the President of the European Commission, but also many leaders from European countries, that the Western Europe should have listened to Central Europe. That, of course, in retrospect, seems to be right, because the Baltics, Poland, Czech Republic, or Romania, for instance, have been ardent advocates of a harder line on Russia, warning about the dangers to our security. But at the same time, Central Europeans have been, more often than not, unable to deliver a structured, informed analysis and policy options that would help our partners across NATO and the EU to understand better the perspective, the intelligence, the knowledge that is behind it. And here comes the strategic foresight toolbox, in which we bring together the understanding and the trends, the existing research, but also we engage stakeholders from the civil society, journalism, from the policy expert groups, but also policymakers or business people in strategic conversations, closed doors, workshops, in which through discursive action we build up options about what's upcoming, or what the policy decision that is about to be taken may mean, and what options might it bring to the table, so to have the best possible outcome, optimal outcome. Maybe it's not always the best, but an optimal outcome. Such is the case of the exercise that we've been engaged related to the European parliamentary elections. In a strategic foresight exercise, together with a number of partners from Central Eastern Europe, including Latvian Transatlantic Organization, we have been analyzing democratic security trends, looking at the prospects of the then upcoming and now concluded European elections, and we looked through the prism of two dimensions. One dimension is the future power of the European Union, the ambition of Europe to influence its surrounding, deter enemies, and bring closer our allies, which can be broadly described as an ambition for more power the EU and Europe overall has. At the same time, the other dimension that we have been analyzing is the state of democracy, democratic health. Our advocacy at Visegrad Insight says clearly that we need to come back to what was in the Cold War known as democratic security, to merge the two perspectives. But not everyone agree. And therefore we have clearly four potential outcomes, four potential scenarios stemming from juxtaposition of power as a vertical dimension and democratic security as a horizontal dimension to our future of the continent. When we have looked and explored the options, policy options of what the political dimension, political dynamics in the European Union may look like, depending on the outcomes and electoral vote that might be coming, but also what policy options are in front of the political leaders, prime ministers, leaders of the EU countries. One scenario, including perspective that is indeed agreeing with more Europe power, but putting less emphasis on democratic security, democratic health, would imagine a far-right alliance within the European Parliament and across European countries. That can be still in the making. The European elections are indeed showing there is a growing potential of the far right and the right wing overall to influence political course and policy making of the EU. Such scenario is not maybe desired, but we can clearly see it's an option on the table. There are options of isolationism when Europe declines its potential of building power, influence and deterrence, and at the same time limit its focus on democratic promotion, democratic standards, rule of law across the Union. Such isolationist, caved-in approach of save yourself, but in fact bringing no safe haven to any democracy is still an option, but it's a doom and gloom scenario in which we promote democracy without putting emphasis on power, and we sort of imitate and pretend that, like in 1990s, the globalization is the only game in town. Makes no sense, but yet there are still some political forces that seem to speculate and build their attraction, the power of attraction of their political ideology on that. They are in demise, but still they are somehow influential. What seems desirable and also part of our advocacy should be the scenario that we look forward to is to have the mainstream parties focus both on the growth of political power, the ability of Europe to produce and also stand united in defense posture across a whole of the continent, including the strategic compass, including build-up of our industry, funding of the defense, and the ability to put all emphasis in making the war in Europe won by democracy in Ukraine, in supporting Kiev in its effort to repel Russian aggression. And at the same time, insisting that democratic security, civil liberties, participation in governance, the EU values prevail, and then they only make such effort a continuous, strong, reliable and successful project in deterring the problems and the challenges of the present age. These four scenarios have served us to discuss it in the public, in the media, to engage civil society, but also to inform policymakers what are their strategic options in these elections, and to put it on knife's edge, so to say, what are the choices ahead of them. And with this, we believe we're contributing the debate, but we're also helping to structure the existing debate full of uncertainties into some more options, some more pragmatic choices that we believe are to be made about the future of Europe. I hope you will find Visegrad Insight Strategic Foresight interesting, especially the one that was focusing on the European Parliament, but also several other strategic foresight exercises and topics where we engage in discussion of future options and scenarios for Europe from Central and Eastern European perspective.
So this has been Renars Kairis moderating the discussion, and I have been welcomed by the panelists, Laurinas Vilkas from Lithuania, the president of League of Young Conservatives, Dr. Stefano Barchioli from Estonia, associate professor of European Studies at the University of Tartu, and Michails Korčevskis from Latvia, a young leader of Together EU community in Latvia. So thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Stay tuned.